Thank you so much, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Mari. We typically don't talk about this, whenever we present, but we thought it was really important today, in light of our presentation, that we let you all know the lenses that we're looking through. So I was brought up and raised Catholic. I went through all the sacraments. I got my communion, my confirmation. I was married to the Catholic Church. I am not a practicing Catholic or Christian, so I don't go to church every week, but I do still have that strong connection to God. I believe that I don't need to go to church and practice it on a weekly basis to still remain spiritual and have that connection.
And I'm Jennifer. I grew up in the Protestant church. I am a big believer of Jesus, but have moved away from organized religion due to a variety of reasons. And so but I have back in my teen years and early 20s, I did look at other religions and practice other religion belief systems until I came to the conclusion that this was going to be my spiritual journey moving forward.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint so we can get started. Sure, I share my sounds. Hold on one sec. Don't want to. Okay, hope that's going to give you the sounds, because it didn't give me an option to click it. Okay. Real quick, Jennifer, can you let me know if you see my screen? You see the PowerPoints? Everything good?
Everything's good. Still have that black thing, but I think we'll be fine. Oh, now it's gone. We're good. It's gone.
Okay, awesome. Okay. Well, as you all know, we are here to talk about the intersection between intimate partner sexual violence and religious and spiritual abuse. Because this is virtual, I try to make it as interactive as possible. So we will be having a couple of polls, not very many. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time. You can either use your phone and text a phone number 22333. That's your phone number. And the text will be Maribel Arid 311. Or if you want to go to a website, there's that long website that it is. It doesn't have to be all capital letters, just needs to be spelled correctly. So I'll give a couple of minutes so you all can join, and then we will start the polls. I'm going to move on to the next screen, but the information will be at the very top of the screen in case. So the information is still up on the top. So we want to know who's in the room with us. What profession are you in? An advocate, law enforcement, education, attorney. And if you are other, put in the chat what that other is. Okay. Program director, accounting. All right, so as I expected, we do have quite a bit of social workers and advocates. We have some people from education, contract admin manager, SA program director, accounting, some attorneys in the room. Wonderful. Okay, I don't see it moving anymore, so I'm going to move on. Thank you again. Welcome everybody. Glad to have a good assortment of people here and professions. So the next poll. There we go. What are you hoping to get from today's presentation? Here you can put in a couple of words, you can put in a sentence, you can put in several sentences, but what are you hoping to get from today's presentation? Again, I'll give a couple of minutes as the responses start coming in. Perspective, more knowledge on this topic. Understanding spiritual abuse and how to support survivors experiencing it. Oh. Expand my perspective, a better understanding of spiritual abuse. How to help survivors who have suffered spiritual abuse, what spiritual abuse looks like, and how to help those affected, to learn how to engage the community to facilitate faith-based conversations about this topic, navigate this topic while abiding social work ethics. Just want to understand why this is something people think is okay to hurt people through spiritual abuse. Absolutely, I love all of those answers, and I think we have a lot to talk about today, in just a short amount of time. We could probably talk for hours about this topic, but I think we're gonna be able to cover most of what you're talking about, how to help survivors, culturally competent support and interventions, better understanding of spiritual abuse and guidance. Absolutely. So hopefully you all will get some of that from this presentation. And if not, we're always available to answer more questions if we don't answer some of your questions throughout. All right, well, thank you again for participating in those 2 polls. There's only a few more polls in the presentation. Again, I try to keep it as interactive as possible. Okay, so here's a quick look at the agenda. As I mentioned, we have a lot to discuss in just 75, 90 minutes. So we're gonna touch on a bunch of these things. We will define religious and spiritual abuse along with religious trauma. We're gonna touch on purity culture. We're gonna look at the spiritual abuse wheel, and we are going to show some examples of what that can look like within a relationship. Of course, in today's world, technology is everywhere, so we will be talking about how religious and spiritual abuse can look in technology. And then we will absolutely be talking in detail about how to work with survivors, along with working with the faith-based communities. Okay, just a couple of disclaimers about today's presentation.
So just like Tim said earlier, there is going to be some triggering content. We are going to be pretty open. We will use correct terminology. So you may hear us talk about situations that are going to use terminology like penis, vagina, anus. Just want to really talk about that piece, that is going to be part of our conversation. And we also need to talk a little bit about that. This presentation isn't going to be all of the religions in the world. Within our research, we found that there's a lot of research regarding the 3 big religions. So you will see us focusing on the Islamic religion, the Jewish religion, and the Christian Catholic religion. And that's where our lens is going to be with this. We just need to let you know that it does happen in other belief systems. And we do want to make this known that all religion is anti-oppressive and anti-violence. And so this is coming from that perspective, that the doctrine that people are coming from, their actual doctrine is about anti-violence, and anti-oppressive behavior. So that's where this is coming from.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, as Jennifer mentioned, we are going to talk about some real life situations as we have worked with our clients, and some personal experiences as well. As with everything, please take care of yourselves. If you need to step away, please do so. All right, here is another poll. So when you hear the words religious or spiritual abuse, what do you think of? Again, a couple words, a sentence. What picture or what words come to your mind when you hear the phrase religious abuse or spiritual abuse? Control, fear, cult, child sexual abuse, manipulating the scriptures, taking advantage of someone based on your personal beliefs, and forcing them on someone else, misuse authority or trust, manipulation, exploiting people's view for personal gain, demeaning personal belief. Absolutely, these are all really, really great answers. Wonderful, thank you for those answers. And move this out of the way. And those are when a pastor uses fear, saying you're gonna burn in hell if you leave a spiritual program. When a pastor says the Bible says to another, cheek and smacking face. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for those answers. Appreciate that. Okay. And yes, a lot of that is absolutely spiritual abuse and religious abuse. That is a lot of times what people think about when they hear spiritual and religious abuse. When you Google religious abuse, you will see a lot of times it's going to be the leader of a religious institution abusing children in their congregation or abusing the adults in their congregation. Some people will think cult as well. So absolutely, those are all different forms of spiritual and religious abuse. For this presentation, as the title mentioned, we are looking at what it looks like within an intimate partner relationship. So it looks just a little bit different than that, but we will dive into that. So what is spiritual and religious abuse? This isn't a very highly researched topic. You're not going to find a whole lot on spiritual and religious abuse. But what you will find is a lot of commonalities when it comes to the definition. So this is a very simplified definition. It says a subtle form of emotional and psychological abuse where a person uses coercive and controlling behaviors within a religious or spiritual context. So that again is very, very simplified. But there you have it. It's very coercive and it's very controlling. And they're using it within that spiritual or religious context. You are having that one partner manipulating the scripture, but it's not just one religion. Again, when you look and you Google spiritual and religious abuse, a lot of what you will find is in the Catholic and Christianity religions. But just like abuse does not discriminate, religious abuse does not discriminate. You can find it in all denominations. You can find it in Christianity, in Muslim, and Judaism, and Buddhism. But like Jennifer mentioned, there's just not a lot of research on those other denominations. It tends to be very focused on just the most popular ones. And it is manipulating the scripture. It's taking a small section of the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Gita, whatever book they use. It's taking a small phrase from there and manipulating it to exert that power and control over their partner. It's going to be a lot of gaslighting, making them believe something is there that isn't there. And just like with all abuse, it is rooted in patriarchy. Okay, so now we need to talk a little bit about what religious trauma is.
So Madi just explained what spiritual abuse is. It is an interpersonal experience between two people religious trauma is really, it's a systemic experience between a person and their religion as a whole. So that's, a lot of people use that terminology interchangeably, and they're really two different concepts. And so spiritual abuse is when it is person to person. Religious trauma is the institution abusing the person. So you're going to see this will happen across many different populations and communities of people, the LGBTQ plus community, sexual violence community, the domestic violence community. It's really when the institution is using abuse against them. So that's the big difference in this research that we found, was we have a tendency to use them the same, and it is not okay. And I'm gonna show an example of that, of religious trauma versus spiritual abuse. In my parents' home church, a very upstanding man was accused of sexual assaulting his sister-in-law. And the sister-in-law, who also goes to the same church, did not get the support she needed from the institution, from the church. And the church actually supported him because the family that he married into, which is what the sister-in-law was the sister of his wife. He actually was found not guilty and had all of the support within their church family, because he wouldn't do that. Her family wouldn't allow someone like that to marry into them because they own a Christian publishing company for Christian books. He wouldn't do these things. The family wouldn't allow this to happen. So why would we support his sister-in-law? Totally blamed the victim, completely left her out, and to the point to where she recanted. And even in that situation, they're like, see, she recanted, it didn't happen. And I had to sit down with my mother and explain that no, she recanted because there was no support, no one believed her. And so that's where the religious trauma for the sister-in-law happened, was the system, the church body, everyone surrounded the perpetrator, as opposed to allowing her to have the support as the survivor. And that's the difference between, that is religious trauma, whereas spiritual abuse would be a perpetrator using the word of whatever doctrine that they believe in against that person. So that's going to be what you're going to see moving forward. These are some quotes that really give a good example of understanding religious trauma. So I'm going to read the first one, and just because of time, we'll skip the second one, and you can read that in the PowerPoint that will be sent out after. So religious trauma occurs when a person's religious experience is stressful, degrading, dangerous, abusive, or damaging. Traumatic religious experiences may harm or threaten to harm someone's physical, emotional, mental, sexual, or spiritual health or safety. So again, it's going back to the person's religious experience based on the institution, not by the human. In 2023, we found a study that showed that 27 to 33% of US adults have experienced trauma at one point in their life, and that trauma is specifically to religious trauma. So it didn't break it down by population of whether it was the LGBTQ plus population, was it a domestic violence, was it sexual assault survivor? It didn't break it down. But when you think about as a whole, about 30% of the population has experienced religious trauma at some point. That's a huge percentage of people that are experiencing this, that we need to assist and help them navigate that system.
So here's a quote. I like this quote a lot because it really gets to the heart of what happens when someone is a victim of that spiritual abuse by a partner. It says spiritual abusers use guilt, fear, and intimidation to manipulate their wives. They attack the personhood or character of their wives by using scripture as a lens. For so many survivors and just human beings, their faith is so deeply rooted in them. A lot of survivors will turn to their faith for strength. That's where they get the strength to take it and move on to the next day, to get up in the morning. But when their partner is using that faith against them, now they begin to question, is their faith really what they need right now? Because their partner is saying, look, right here in this line, it is saying what's happening is supposed to happen. You are supposed to submit to me. I am supposed to have all of the control over you. So now they begin to question themselves because it is such a deep part of them. And that is when we go and talk more about working with the survivors, we'll see that. So we want to touch just a tiny bit on purity culture. So what is purity culture? So a little bit of history. Purity culture started in the 90s. It started in response to the AIDS epidemic and the high teen pregnancy rates at the time. During the time, a lot of parents, you could find it mostly in the Christian belief system, but also some Baptist belief systems as well. They felt that in order to save their children from the dangers that were happening, they needed to remain pure. And so the True Love Waits movement was very big during this time, so much that they would have rallies where thousands of people would show up, and they would have, they would have sermons and speeches about saving yourself, about making sure you were pure. And it was huge back then. And there's still to this day a lot who still believe in that purity culture. Now, while it's often associated with the Christian communities, that's not the only place it happens. It happens all across the world in other countries. In Indonesia, in order to become a part of the Indonesian army, if you're a female, you have to prove that you are a virgin. You have to have a virginity test done. In a lot of other countries, a daughter's purity, a daughter's virginity is used to help arrange marriages, and that family is able to arrange possibly a better marriage with their daughter being pure and being a virgin. So with the purity culture, the females are having to dress conservatively. They have to, because if they show too much skin, if they show too much leg, they are responsible for the males and their behaviors. They're tempting them sexually. And so with that, they learn to be ashamed of their body. And this is something that could follow them all into adulthood. They also are taking purity pledges. And this is an example of one of the pledges that might have been signed. And the purity pledges are signed by both male and females. But during purity balls, the father will give a purity ring to their daughter. And the father will say they are going to watch over their daughter's purity and make sure that they remain pure until marriage. But I want to make sure to understand that, like I said, there are some that still practice it to this day. And it is still happening today. And we're not saying in any shape or form that is wrong. If this is how you were raised, if you are raising your family that way, absolutely, please, that is okay. What we're looking at is how it can be toxic for some. for example, a survivor who was raised with this in this purity culture. She was a virgin, and then she's sexually assaulted, and now she's no longer a virgin. And she might carry a lot more of that shame because now she is sinned. Now she is not as good as she used to be because she's no longer a virgin. Or if the perpetrator has done this to the female and knows that the female was a virgin, they're going to use that to continue to control them. No one's going to want you anymore. You're tainted, you're dirty, you're a sinner in the eyes of God. So why would you tell anybody? If you will excuse me, I need to stop sharing real quick. I'm going to disengage my subtitles. My apologies. I'm trying to make sure I can. Okay. Hopefully that works. Let me share my screen again. Okay. Okay. I had talked a little bit earlier about how some countries, they test for virginity. Well, that doesn't just happen in other countries. It is happening here in the United States. In fact, as of 2020, that was the most recent I could find, but as of 2020, there are no state or federal laws banning virginity testing here in the United States. And this study was done in 2017 by the Baylor College of Medicine, where they interviewed and surveyed 288 physicians. Of those 288 physicians, 10% of them were asked by their parents to perform a virginity test on their child. And 34 of them actually performed some sort of virginity test. However, of those 34% that performed this virginity test, a good majority of them said that they actually lied to the parents because they were fearful for the safety of that child. Okay. And Sarah Moslin wrote the book Virgination, Sexual Purity and American Adolescence. And she's quoted as saying the whole point of purity culture is patriarchal power. So we're going back to what the underlying foundation of it all is. So here we have the triangle. I'm sure many of us have seen this triangle with different words in there, but this shows how it may start off as simple, like the hymen myth or virginity pledges, but it gradually starts to get more and more severe. And I will say that even to today, I hope that if you don't know, when we talk about the hymen myth is there is no hymen as far as breaking through the barrier of the hymen and proving that you're a virgin. And some people still believe that today. About 4 years ago, I went to the hospital for a hospital accompaniment, and it was a 19-year-old young girl, and she was there with her parents. Well, her parents were outside while she was inside getting the exam. So I had asked her if she wanted me to be inside with her during the exam. She said, no, I would really like you to go talk to my parents and let them know what's going on. I said, okay. So I went outside and I started talking to her parents. And the very first thing that her mom asked me was, are you sure she was raped? Because she didn't bleed. So her mom thought that because her mom believed in the hymen myth and believed that when you are a virgin and you have sex for the very first time, you're going to bleed. And that is a way of proving your virginity. So of course, I had to talk to her and the dad about, it is a myth. Most do not bleed during intercourse, even the first time. And I could tell that they were very confused by that. So that's just to say, that was only 4 or 5 years ago when that happened. So it is still happening today. There are still those who believe in that. But as you see, this goes on and on. One of them is how, well, sex is from penis and vagina penetration. So they will use anal sex to preserve their virginity. And I believe, Jennifer, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, because I think I can show an example of this. And I went to college during the 1990s, because we know I've been in the movement since 1998. And during that time, the purity culture was pretty big. I did not personally participate in that, but I did have friends that did. And one of my friends was all about being a virgin when she got married, and was in a very serious relationship. And her partner convinced her that because the belief of intercourse should be penis and vagina, that if they did anal sex, that she would still be a virgin. And so that is what they did during their period of time that they were together in this serious relationship. And he did it, and he used her belief system against her to ensure that he could still get his sexual desires and needs met during the time of their relationship. And she did not understand until much later that what had happened was actually sexual content, that these things happened, and that she had to deal with the fact that she was pressured and convinced that anal sex was going to be different than penis vagina sex, and that that she wasn't a virgin in regards to the concept of what virginity actually meant. So I think, and that was only 30 years ago, that was still a concept, and that was someone who was using her belief system against her to ensure that his needs were met during that time.
So again, like these pyramids show, it just shows that if we're okay with the bottom part of the pyramid, it sometimes will excuse those that are above it. And so we need to just be able to educate and show that nothing on this pyramid is okay. So we're going to quickly go over the power and control rules when it comes to spiritual and religious abuse. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, hopefully not too fast for the interpreters, because I really want us to make sure that we get to working with the survivors and the faith-based communities. So we all know the power and control rule. It's been adapted from various different abuse, human trafficking, child abuse, elder abuse, and here you have it for spiritual and religious abuse. It's the same prongs as the power and control rule. It just shows how in each of them they're going to misuse the scripture. They're going to isolate them from the faith community. They're going to misuse traditions and cultural norms to take that power and control over each other. They're going to use the children, blame the victim. So you'll be able to get this in the PowerPoint when we send it out so that you can be able to really see and take your time reading through each one of them. But we are going to show what it looks like. So here you see the power and control rule and each of those spokes, and how there's different scriptures in each spoke that kind of plays to how an abuser might use emotional abuse or might use their male privilege or the children. And we're going to go over just a few of those. So the first one, now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives are to submit to their husbands in everything. So here, one is from Ephesians 5:24. They're a partner, a husband can easily both show this one line and see and tell their wives, look, you're supposed to submit to me. You're supposed to do everything I tell you to do, and it shows you right here. And if you don't do this, then you're not a very good Christian wife. You're not living up to your Christian duties. Here it says a wife does not have the right over her own body, but her husband does. In the same way, a husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. This you'll find in Corinthians. A lot of times a husband may just show that one sentence where a wife does not have the right over her own body, but her husband does. And this, if the husband just shows that one line, doesn't show the rest of it, he can say, this shows right here, God is telling you that I can do whatever I want to you, to your body, whether it be sexual or not, because now I, as your husband, have that right over your body. Again, leaving out the second part of it. And the same that a wife, because as in all abuse, we know that the majority of victims are females and the majority of abusers are males, but a female can also spiritually abuse their husband, absolutely. And so she might just show the second part that says a husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. And use it in that same context of sexually abusing her husband and saying, it says right here that this is what I'm supposed to do. A woman is to learn quietly with full submission. I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. Instead is to remain quiet. And here you can find this from Timothy. Now here you can see how a husband will be able to use it and manipulate the wife, saying, you have to stay quiet. You're supposed to be submissive to me. Everything I'm doing says in the Bible that I'm supposed to do this, and you can't tell anybody. You are to remain quiet, and you have no authority over me. I have the full authority over you. So these are just 3 verses from the Bible that a husband can manipulate the scripture to be able to exert that power and control over the wife. And they do it over and over again. So now the wife doesn't know what to believe because she's thinking one thing and now the husband is saying this. But it doesn't just happen in the Christian faith. As we mentioned, it happens in all faiths. So this is, we're going to talk a little bit about the Orthodox Jewish community, specifically about the gets. Now, a get is in the Orthodox Jewish community, if a wife or husband wants to get a divorce, they have to go through a certain system to be able to get that divorce finalized, and it's called a get. However, it is up to the husband to approve the get. So if a wife wants to divorce their abusive husband in that Jewish community, but the husband says no, then they get no get. And that wife is now called an aguna, which is a woman chained to a dead marriage. And she is in charge of the Shalom Bayis, which means keeping peace in the family. It falls on the wife to do that. So if the wife is disrupting that family by getting a divorce, then she's, and the abusive husband will say, you're not living up to your duties. You're failing as a Jewish wife because you're not keeping the peace. This specific picture shows a lady by the name of Shava who was trying to get a divorce, a get, from her Jewish husband, and he refused. He absolutely refused. And this went on for a decade, even longer. And she was able to divorce him in the American court civil system. So she got a divorce civilly through the American court system, but she could not get that divorce, that get, in the Jewish community because he refused. And that's all she wanted. So they took to protesting. They would go to his house, to his family's house, anything to try to get him to approve the get. Because now, again, a person's spirituality, their faith is a big part of who they are. That's their community. That's their family. And so Chava, if Chava wanted to get married again, she could get married in the American court system, but she would not be able to get married in the Jewish community because she is an Aguna. Her husband refused to allow the get. So this quote from Karen Cusick from a study that they did, an article that they did about it, says to embrace freedom is to lose her Jewish identity, her way of life. But to hold on to Orthodox Judaism is to forgo later love. So she could say, okay, I got my divorce in the American courts. I can go on, I can get married, I can find love again and just get married in the American system. But that's not her. Her way of life is finding that love and getting married in the Jewish community. But she's got to choose which one she's going to do, which one she's going to accept because her husband is not approving the get. So here you see the power and control wheel. Again, this is actually an adaptation of the power and control wheel, and it shows what it would look like in a Muslim household. This was created by Dr. Sharifa, who founded the North American Council for the Muslim Woman in 1992. In 2000, she created Peaceful Family Projects and brought awareness of domestic violence in the Muslim community. And she talks a lot about this wheel that she adapted. So it shows what it looks like. So here you see it looking what it could look like in that household. They can threaten to marry another wife, threaten God ordained wife beating, saying it's discipline. They're just disciplining their wives. They can purposely dirty the kitchen several times a day, making their wife have to clean it over and over and over again. They will call them unfit Muslim moms, unfit Muslim wives. A lot of times they may also refuse to allow the wife to get education or training, isolating them and making them dependent on the husband. They can use their male privilege, saying it is their right to do what they want. They can, a lot of times will use their children against the wife, saying they're becoming too American. So here again, you can see what it might look like when you're looking, if you have a client who is Muslim and is going through this, what it might look like in their household. This is a really great quote from an article. It says, according to her abuser or those supporting him, if she tells anyone about the abuse, she'll be condemned by God for her insolence. That's the Islam's belief of covering one another's sins. So the abuser will say, well, look, you can't tell anybody. You'll be condemned. You can't tell anybody. You have to stay quiet. Again, making sure that nobody will know what's going on and using isolation to further control them. So before we move on, again, I want to make sure that we give time for other stuff, but does anybody have any questions or comments about anything so far? And we'll try to have time at the end as well. Okay, so in today's world, technology is everywhere. We know that. And technology can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. You know, before all this social media, before technology was so big, if we needed guidance, if we needed advice, we would go to somebody. We would go to a counselor, we'd go to our faith leaders, we'd go to our congregation to find that advice. Now, somebody can just easily go online and try to look for that advice online. And again, it can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. So if you type in rape in marriage and religion. These are two videos that might pop up. Now, I'm going to admit, obviously, with the studies and research I'm doing, my algorithm is a little bit skewed because of this presentation and the research I've been doing, but somebody might still be able to come across these two videos when it says rape in marriage and religion.
Wives, you must submit yourself to your husband as unto the Lord. And in this matter of submission, I want you to know up front, ladies, that once you get married, you are no longer your own. You are your husband's. You understand what I'm saying, Claudia? And I emphasize that because I saw in court the other day on TV where a lady sued her husband for rape. And I would say to you, gentlemen, the best person to rape is your wife. But then now it has become legalized, rape. I don't understand how you belong to somebody and they are all right.
Daniel, if a husband forces sex upon his wife against her will, is that wrong under Sharia?
So Islam comes with certain marital rights. Husbands have certain rights and duties. For example, the husband has to provide shelter, he has to provide clothing, he has to provide food, and the state, the Qadi, basically the Islamic State, can force the husband to provide for his wife and for his children and his family. This is something that's good. This is an important policy that reduces the man's individual liberty. And similarly, the woman's individual liberty is also restricted, that if the husband has a reasonable request for sexual relations, reasonable, then she is obligated to comply with that. If she decides not to, he can't start beating her and he can't start abusing her in a violent way, but the Qadi can say that, look, you're not meeting your spousal duties and therefore you will forfeit your mahr, for example, the bride dowry, you'll forfeit your other privileges as a wife. So there's give and take in marriage. That's why Islam is beautiful, because it creates this dependency between husband and wife. It's not like modern sexless marriages in the West where women say, oh, I can leave my husband to have no sex for months because I don't feel like it. I'm a strong, independent woman. And meanwhile, the husband is working his tail off trying to provide for his family, but there's no obligation on his wife to reciprocate in any kind because she's a strong, independent feminist and she has to have maximum choice and opportunity. But the poor devil, he has to work and provide for all of that with no compensation or anything.
Husband gives shelter, so he has a right to beat her up.
I hate to do this.
Okay, I know those videos were kind of tough. So any comments on that? You know, look at the title of the second one that we listened to. It says marital rape is beautiful. So just think about a survivor who is looking for advice, looking for guidance, trying to understand what's happening. And she types in rape in marriage and religion, and two videos pop up where a pastor promoting rape and marital rape is beautiful. Can you imagine what kind of damage that would do to the survivor who sees that?
And I think it's important to know, and I'm going to preface this because when we found these videos, it kind of hits you in the face, and I know I had a very strong, intense reaction, especially to the first one. You cannot find the entire clip of him anymore. It's gone. And I do want to say that the Seventh-day Adventist church in New York actually made him resign, and he is banned from preaching anymore in that for that belief system. So he's not allowed to do that. But you can find him in Jamaica, where he went back to, speaking the same rhetoric of what you just heard him say. So even though here in the United States we said no, this doctrine said no, this is not acceptable behavior, he was able to move someplace else and still be able to pass this message along. So we have to remember in some of this, and that we are talking about not just what's in the doctrine, but how it's being taught. And what is the faith-based leader? I think that's a really important piece of this as well, is that we are looking at that.
Okay. So here you see how technology can have a very negative impact on a survivor, but it can also have a very positive impact on a survivor. I'm going to skip this next video for time-wise, but it's a really great video where you have 6 different leaders of their faith talking about how they are against domestic violence, and we have to all come together to be able to end it. So when you get this copies of this presentation, I can send the link to this video as well, because it's a really great positive video. But here, I do want to show this because not only will you see videos, you can also find really great leaders who are who know and are helping and calling the church out and calling the leaders out when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault. They're showing that it is not okay to do that. And those who are promoting it, those who are saying, work it out, they're not in the right. Jennifer, did you want to talk a little bit about Patrick Weaver?
Okay. I love Patrick Weaver. He grew up in an abusive household, watching his mom and his dad and her partners have intimate partner violence. And he challenges the church, the Christian church specifically, to do better and to meet the needs of survivors of family violence and sexual violence within their congregation. And he will flat out say and call out churches that if you are not preaching anti-violence and anti-oppressive behavior, you are not supporting a survivor, then you're not doing God's work. He also tells survivors that if your church is not supporting you and doesn't have the infrastructure to support you as a survivor of domestic violence or sexual violence, then that is not the church for you, because there are churches out there that will use the doctrine in the way that it's meant to be spoken. And because the doctrine is read as anti-oppressive, anti-violence, it's really the human issue of the human leader and the human leaders of the doctrine who's teaching it that is causing the religious trauma, because they're allowing that to continue within their systemic problem, within their system. So if you haven't followed him and you don't know what his work is and you want to see what he is doing for the movement, he does some really, really great things, and is very much at the table talking about family violence and sexual violence and how our religious institutions need to do better.
Yeah, I follow Patrick Weaver and he is so inspiring.
Oh,
Absolutely.
He's fantastic.
So here's a quick quote. It seemed as if I was viewing life from inside a tumble dryer. I couldn't make any sense of anything and completely lost any sense of myself as a person. Study that was done in the United Kingdom in 2023 with religious and abusive survivors, victims, where their partners were very spiritually and religiously abusive to them. So here you just see how they feel like they're in a tumble dryer. They don't know what to do. believed all their lives is one thing. Here comes this partner who they thought they could trust, who they believe, and they're showing them a different thing. They're gaslighting them. And we all know that gaslighting can have a really negative impact on a person's psyche. They lose who they are. And for somebody who has their faith so deep rooted in who they are, that is a big thing. Okay, quick poll, kind of break up some of this. How are we doing so far? Are we doing okay? Not really sure. You're questioning stuff. Oops, sorry, y'all. Anyways. Putting you to sleep, hopefully not. Being contemplative, okay, good. That's always good.
Mhm.
Mind blown. Good, good, good. So. I can't tell if anybody, but hopefully we haven't put anybody to sleep. I can't tell if that's coming up yet. Good. Okay, we're almost done. Promise we are almost done.
All right.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about what does all that look like? Now that we kind of have a context of what it looks like, let's see how we can put it all together.
So this is where I, as an advocate for so long, where we're really going to talk about my experiences and through how I brought the faith-based community to the table and how we have changed some of what our Christian churches, specifically in the rural county that I work and live in, how they are responding to domestic violence and sexual violence and coming to the table to help support our survivors. Next slide. We are probably going to skip, as much as I love Jana Duggar and what she says in this podcast, because we only have about 20 minutes. We're going to skip her because I really want to go into
So just
working with the faith-based communities and how to really get them at the table, because that really seems to be the most struggle. But we're also going to talk about how to work with survivors. We did talk a little bit about earlier the difference between religious and spiritual abuse versus religious trauma. And these are the effects of what happens when someone is experiencing religious or spiritual abuse. And remember, that is a really difficult thing because you've got someone telling you and using your belief system against you. So you're going to see survivors that are feeling self-hatred. They're going to feel shame. They're going to feel like they need to be perfect. The survivors that I work with in regards to the domestic violence task force that we will talk about, that's run through a church. Our survivors who sit on that talk about how they needed to be perfect in God's eyes to be a better wife or a better partner within their Christian faith. They have hard times making decisions, and also the loss of community, because if their institution, and I'm saying this very clinically because I want to say that religion as a whole, whatever their belief system, is an institution when it's organized. And so if you have someone who is experiencing this, they could lose their community because they no longer feel safe, because they are not living up to what their doctrine is saying. Or you think about the story I told about in my parents' home church, that as someone who came out and said, my brother-in-law, who is an upstanding person in the community, I mean, he was the representative for the state government in my hometown, that the support was for him. So of course she feels like her community, her church community, has left her behind. And that is a really big piece of what we see with survivors, is that their church community is gone. So next slide. So let's talk about how to look at this and how to best serve survivors within their institutional belief system. So it is really important for us to understand their belief system. And that's coming from anybody who walks through the door. So I, as an advocate, personally take the time, if it is not my belief system, that I educate myself on what it means and what their doctrine teaches and what it's supposed to mean. Because if we don't take the extra steps to be able to educate ourselves, we may do more harm than we could. I think about an example where I had a client come in. She is of the Mormon faith. We were filling out paperwork for her to do some legal help and make a referral over to a legal partner. And we were doing the paperwork, and one of the questions was, what is your religious belief system? At that point is when I found out that she was a Mormon. And I know enough about that belief system that if she filed for divorce, what would that excommunicate her from that support system? So we stopped and we had to talk about it, so that we could make the best and the safest decisions for her in regards to her sexual violence and her intimate partner violence with her husband. For her, she had already gone to the bishop, had gotten her divorce blessed, and because her bishop of the church here is very anti-violence and anti-oppressive, and said it goes against our doctrine that violence happens in the home and sexual violence happens in the home. And that was a really important piece to know, but knowing enough to say, whoa, I need to make sure that she understands what could happen if she continued down this path. Not that I want her to not do it, but really look at, where is your safety net? Who is your community? I don't want you to lose your community of support, especially from it, because she was very integrated into the community, was very active in their ministries. And I just didn't want her to lose that piece. Listening to the client, what their needs are, what their belief system is, and respecting their choices. Had she not thought through that process of going through what needed to happen to be able to get the divorce and be blessed, if she had gone back and said, no, I'm not going to move forward with the divorce, that's fine. We're going to safety plan in a different way, but we're also going to continue to have those discussions, because your faith-based belief system is such an integral part of most individuals that we need to know what those things are. One of the things that I did have happen that was really an interesting dynamic of things was, we have a Muslim client who has a pretty terrible intimate partner violence relationship and sexual violence relationship happening. And it was an arranged marriage. And her husband is more of the fundamental side of Islam. So very much the man, gender roles, all of those things are happening. But Islam as a whole is a peaceful and an anti-oppressive religion. And she realized that now that she was an American citizen, that she no longer needed to continue living in that situation. And we started working with her, and we were able to connect her to a shelter that works primarily with Muslim individuals. And she was able to leave our small rural area in South Texas to go to that location. Unfortunately, her husband filed for custody 2 days after she fled, and has had to return back to this area. But the thing that we really focused on and helped her between the time that she reached out for services and the time that she fled the situation was making sure she had the support system. He did not allow her to go to mosque. He did not allow her to have a religious community that could support her through something like this. All she had was her family back in her home country, and his family. Luckily for her immediate family is very much on board is grateful that she's leaving. Her father has apologized before he passed away for arranging this marriage to this man who stripped her away of all of her rights and all of her of who she is as a woman. She's educated, she has degrees, and has been at home in an apartment for 12 years and not really being able to leave. So I think that was a situation, and we've had to really learn about her religion and her belief system so we could help her make the best decisions possible, and give her her choices and her options so that we were able to understand why she was making the decisions she needed to make for her belief system. I'm really sorry, y'all. We only have about 10 more minutes. So I'm trying to not rush, but I'm also kind of rushing a little bit because I want to make sure we get through everything. The next part is really, how do we bring the faith-based communities to the table? And this is something that I've spent the last, 7 or 8 years figuring out how to bring them to the table. I've been with the Purple Door for 10 years. And that was something that we really needed to do because we know that in order for sexual violence and domestic violence to end, we need everybody at the table. And so I spent the first probably 3 or 4 years here in this small rural community, meeting our faith-based community where they were at. So, I'm not going to go in guns blazing, talking about the patriarchy and how all of these things are there and they need to change their way of preaching. I'm not going to get very far. So I spent a lot of time investing with some leaders in our community, and faith-based leaders. I spent time to assess their needs, identify where they were as a group, and really met them where they were at, offered them services. And what I did find out was that one of our churches, until it became real, until they were face to face with a survivor who had been recently sexually assaulted and had been beaten up by her husband, until she showed up at the church, it really wasn't real to them. It doesn't really matter. The church leaders didn't really understand how it affected their congregation. From that, when that happened, that pastor reached out to me and said, I want to do something as Christians, because this is a really Christian-based area. We do have a mosque, but that's our only other non-Christian belief system in this small community. So we really talked about it, went to the Local Ministry Alliance, which is a group of leaders who are preaching and leading the word of God. We talked about that. We started the End Domestic Violence Task Force coming out of the Christian church. Huge, because that now we had a group of people who wanted to learn more about sexual violence and domestic violence and how to serve their congregation in a way to allow survivors a safe place to go and not have their leaders in their faith go, well, if you would be better, if you would follow the word of God, then you wouldn't be experiencing sexual violence and domestic violence. And so it has now come under, as it's now a mission of our First Baptist Church here in town, which seems really interesting because it's typically a pretty conservative church. But our first meeting was, we're not here to pray violence away, and we're not here to bring people to God. Our job is to provide support and fill in the gaps of what is already happening in this community. And that is what we're going to do. We are not going to discriminate against race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, any of those things. If someone needs help, we're going to do that. And so what happened was we did a needs assessment, and they decided we really, like I said, we needed to focus on the gaps of what is happening between law enforcement, the Purple Door, which is the local DV and rape crisis center, and the judicial system. What we found out with having those open conversations within those entities was that our law enforcement were putting survivors in hotel rooms out of their own pocket because the closest shelter is an hour away, and at 2:00 in the morning, it's hard to get them there. And for some people, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work. So our law enforcement was putting people in hotel rooms. Okay, law enforcement doesn't need to do that. They have different things to do. They can't afford $120 every other night to do that. So the task force decided to raise funds, and now we have a hotel voucher program where someone who is calling law enforcement and is experiencing domestic violence or sexual violence can be put in a hotel for 1 or 2 nights. And then our local advocate will follow up and safety plan, talk about services and talk about options. So that person knows that they have other options than just staying in that situation. And we have then since then realized that more people need access to the voucher system. So we have a university in this town and we have a naval installation. Both of those institutions have access to the hotel voucher program to ensure that our entire community is being met. And then you can also, the Purple Door and our court systems can also set people up. We have a court accompaniment program. Most of us who work in industries, we all know we go to court with clients. What we also found out from talking to prosecutors was that some people don't want to come to the local domestic violence or rape crisis center to get a protective order or to do any of those things or to do any kind of criminal trial. That's their choice. That's their option. But they still wanted court accompaniment. So we have trained volunteers that have done that and that will go if the court system calls and says, I've got someone who needs someone to sit there on their side of the courtroom to provide support. We have trained people who know how to do that. They're not there to work with survivors. They're not there to interact with any of that. They're there to be bodies in the courtroom to show survivors that we believe them. We provide resources for survivors, but we also realized that we needed to educate people. And yes, our agencies are doing that, but we really needed to get into the nitty-gritty on a community level. And so they partner with us, the Purple Door, and we go in and we do a dual training between what they do and the dynamics of family violence and sexual violence and how to help so that our jury pool is educated. Our common, regular people, just people who don't work in the system are educated so that they can know what to do if their friend, their coworker, their employee, if somebody, they see it, they know where to send people within the industry. Next slide.
That is actually,
Yeah, we're done. I wish there was more.
Do you want to talk just a little bit, Jennifer, about some of the types of trainings that they can get? I think, one sec. Here we go. Like the Call to Peace and the Chris Moles.
Yeah, so these are some places that we have located. And if you're looking for things when you go to the Christian church and you're going into the Christian doctrine, these are some places that really focus on offering training to specific churches and to the Christian faith. And so they are going to Call to Peace does Feed the Flock, which is a training specifically for faith-based leaders in the Christian faith to know how to respond to domestic violence. Focus Ministries does the same thing. Both of those entities will help churches create a plan for the church and how they respond to domestic violence. Chris Moles is a LPC who has it's called Peaceworks University for faith-based organizations, including churches. Again, they can do an online membership. They can learn, the pastors and faith-based communities and their leaders can go through and do that. But they also have a biblical-based BIP type program where they are working with male perpetrators who, and using the biblical perspectives of why what their behavior is it's coming from the biblical perspective instead of through the BIP perspective, which for some people is very helpful. My alarm just went off that said that was the 5-minute mark. Give Her Wings and Grace are also 2 really great online versions and people that do some really great training as well. Grace stands for Godly Response to Abuse in a Christian Environment. All of these places are holding Christian churches accountable to what they are doing in regards to how they respond to domestic violence and sexual violence within their congregation. And it's really important to let people know when you're meeting with them that there are places for them to get trained using their belief system We also see that within the Jewish faith, and the National Center on Domestic Violence in the Jewish Community, JWI, they focus both on domestic violence and sexual violence. That is what I use when I talk to our Jewish partners, and talk about how they can integrate that within their doctrine and within their teachings. But that's it. I feel like I wish we could have gone through everything, but here's some other things that we do. We have found of like how to connect them and connect survivors of how to find a supportive environment.
And here are some online resources that are specifically for religious abuse survivors, spiritual abuse survivors, Tears of Eden, Sacred Wilderness, and The Way Home. They can find a lot of great blogs and the community of survivors there. Here are some fabulous books on it. There are a ton of books out on spiritual abuse. These are just a few of them. And of course, all of our resources. But yeah, that's about it. Sorry we had to rush at the very end.
Are there any questions, anything you want to talk about? I can just say our End Domestic Violence Task Force, because we are so integrated in our community, we just got to this morning, just got a huge private donation that we're going to invest back on our needs assessment. Of what we found is that we're going to sponsor a couple survivors for a year to get them into an apartment and help them navigate that so that they don't have any financial problems. And so that's going to be really helpful. But we're going to use some of that money to help talk to attorneys about allowing us to do a retainer fee and then doing the rest of the work pro bono. So it's really fun once you start getting them involved. It starts to blossom, because then you realize, oh, they're at the table, they're going to make some good impact, and they really help supplement what we're already doing. Any questions, any comments, anything you guys want to know before we leave?
Thank you so much for being here and giving us of your time.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate you. Hopefully you learned something, or walking away, or even challenged your thought process a little bit.
Just want to say again, thank you so much to both of you, Bonnie and Jennifer, for this presentation. Great. I put the survey, so please, feedback is appreciated. Presenters love it. We love it as we're putting together future events. So please take a minute to fill out the survey. I'll also put the links for the recordings for workshops and for materials in the text chat. I want to say a special thanks to Gabriela and Alejandra for providing interpretation services, making this a multilingual space. Yeah, thank you all so much. It's about 2:59, but I'm sure we can hang out for a couple minutes as long as Jennifer and Mari okay with that.
Yeah, and if people want to kind of enjoy your afternoon, but if people want to pick our brains about how we brought them to the table, especially in a really small rural area, reach out. I am always open. Our task force is really open about how we did it and what we did to bring them to the table. Uh-oh.
Did you need us to stay on afterwards, Tim?
I don't think so. No, great job, y'all. Thank you so very much for the presentation. Really good and important stuff. I appreciate that.
I hope I was able to slow down enough for the interpreters. I talk really fast on a normal basis.
I can tell a difference. I think you slowed down, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of TASA. I wish I was there.
Alrighty. Bye, everyone. I'm gonna head out so I can
Bye.
get ready for the membership meeting.
Me too.
All right.
Bye.
Or
Bye,
I've
all.
got another meeting, so bye.
Bye.
How do I leave this?